Okay.
All right, good afternoon. It is Monday, November 4th, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Market Participation. We'll call this to order at 2:08. Can I get a roll call? I am Chair Terry and Member Buffong.
Here, present.
And Member Joy.
Here.
Member Carefield. Member Spiritos. And we will squeak by with a quorum. So, all right. Before we get to public comments, I just want to remind everybody that are going to come up here and give public comments, please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning before your time's up. And then, of course, please state your name before providing your comments. And I believe, Amber, would you like to read in anybody online?
To provide public comment via telephone, call 669-444-9171. Enter webinar ID 885-2134-5085, followed by passcode 761916. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes and you will receive a 30-second warning.
Thank you very much. And we'll let everybody dial in if necessary. So we'll start with public comments here and we'll open it up to anybody in the audience.
All right. Hi, for the record, Abby Kaufman with the Chamber of Cannabis. I'm the executive director, and I'm really excited about today's agenda. Prior to stepping into this position full-time, I've only worked in cannabis data for the past 5 years, so I was really pleased to read the cannabis market study and see that my former employer was cited in there, where I was for 3 years. So I don't know if I'll get to my full comments on the report right now, but for agenda item 3 on I know that the focus is on defining the number of employees and revenue, but I wanted, since the wording, I think this has come up before in terms of it's an emerging small cannabis business, and the purpose of the statute is to find opportunities for participation. But then in paragraph in 5A, it has to be in existence, operational, and operated for profit. So I would think it's pretty safe to assume that most of the businesses that need the most help participating are those that are not open for business in that sense of the word operational. So rather than building the pilot program with the ready to use open for business meaning of operational, I'd be curious if there's room for interpreting operational to mean relating to the routine functioning and activities of business, so that it can include licenses that aren't yet active. Those businesses are likely already paying taxes and engaging in commerce related to their business. And if the Secretary of State has the business entity status listed as active, perhaps then that could be viewed as operational and eligible. I figured that might be an interim solution rather than waiting for statutory changes, since this legislation was introduced 5 years ago and we're still working through definitions to create the regulations for it. So I'd hate to see more delays, but definitely want it done right. I'm gonna kind of abruptly shift gears and make a second public comment at the end, but for the cannabis market study, I mean, it's great. I'd like to see this done every year. It was great, and I think overall it was a good read. I do have some feedback about 3 of the 4 main recommendations. So analyze underserved area. For the first one that they have is licensing opportunities. And I realize that they're third party, but it describes the report describes a complex scenario of unequal supply and demand. And then the first suggestion involves introducing more licenses. Okay, thank you. So I just thought that it'd be wise to focus on increasing retail licensing and expanding delivery options to remove those barriers rather than potentially creating an oversupply problem. I will come back at the end for my other 2 comments about this, and I'll look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else locally? Okay, Amber, do we have anybody that called in?
There's no one online to provide public comment.
Okay, and we did get a couple submissions via email as well that I won't read as they're a bit lengthy, but they'll be posted online for anybody that wants to reference them. Okay, let's moving on to agenda item number 2. We'll go for consideration of approval of the April 12th, 2024 minutes. You've been given a copy, and I believe a copy is available online. So do I have a motion to approve?
I approve that motion.
I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion is approved. Sorry? Oh, approved. So
All in favor of,
all in favor of?
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 3. So propose and define the annual gross revenue and number of employee maximum limitations that would be used to qualify an emerging small cannabis business is applicable to NRS 678A.450. For those of you that don't have it, and this was kind of touched upon in public comment, so to clear up any confusion, we'll just, I'll let you know what 678A.450 Section 4 says. And it says the board shall, by regulation, establish a pilot program for identifying opportunities for an emerging small cannabis business to participate in the cannabis industry. As used in this subsection, emerging small cannabis business means a cannabis-related business that A, is in existence, operational, and operated for a profit. B, maintains its principal place of business in the state. And C, satisfies requirements for the number of employees and annual gross revenue established by the board regulation. Excuse me. So I did want to touch on, because I think this is something that we discussed previously, and we'll kind of bring it back up to reiterate what we're looking for. But operational, I think we did have the same confusion early on, and it was clarified at one of the meetings that operational doesn't necessarily need to be a licensee. It can be call it a cannabis adjacent, ancillary business, anybody that would be in support of the cannabis industry. So I think that and for the purposes of this, operational and operated for a profit, I would assume would be fully licensed and the business has established its business case.
okay, so just for clarification. Let's say it's a business that is operating but is not licensed yet, right? From the illicit market, they have a business license. It might be categorized under something else, and they might be making products from oils or medicines that are not in the regulated space. Do we count those as small businesses? Do we count these as these businesses? Because those are, I feel like, our most likely targets for a pilot program, is to get them out of the illicit market and into the legal market with a very easy pathway.
I personally think that's something that we would not want to encourage, because by doing so, it's almost greenlighting the illicit market as a pathway to get here. So I think that's probably a question that we would not ask. I would expect that personally, I would say that in existence means that it has a business license operating for a profit. It is not a nonprofit. If somebody has a business to operate a business, I don't think it's our position to judge where that came from.
Okay, right.
And
Okay.
will somebody run into complications for things that are outside of our jurisdiction? I would say that's something that an individual business would have to address on their own.
Okay.
If you have suggestions, absolutely.
I would add to that, Shane. Sorry to jump in, guys.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think we got to look at stuff that is inside our ecosystem. And if it's trying to get inside our ecosystem, it needs to be operating and working effectively. All the other established licenses are and have been from the beginning. Because I think what you're talking about, or what this could lead it to, is illicit smoke shops or licensed smoke shops that are out there selling intoxicating hemp right now, getting adopted or migrating into our ecosystem. That'd have a pretty profound impact on the industry.
Okay. So I'm talking about the small business owner that is selling T-shirts right now and maybe infused cookies and beverages as well. But that's under their licensed business. They're selling merch, right? Because they want to be in this space, they don't have the resources. And so I don't know how we determine the difference between an illicit smoke shop owner that has a brick and mortar that, well, not illicit, but let's just say hemp, right? Let's just say it comes from the hemp space. Because that's not the illicit cannabis market, hemp is legal. And so how do we determine which small business we will take on into this pilot program?
I would say that there's probably a couple different sets of regulations that are going to govern this, and including
Right,
the application itself.
right,
So if somebody on the state and local business licensing side has a business that defines the scope of what they're allowed to do in that business legally, and they are operating within that framework, then I would say they qualify. To use some examples, if somebody has a CBD brick and mortar shop and they have a state and a local business license to do that, and they're operating within compliance, then that would be an example of something that I would say would be eligible for our program. If somebody is selling Delta 8 products, for example, which are explicitly
in the
prohibited by the state of Nevada, then I would say that they are not operating compliantly and probably need to be ready to face the consequences for those actions. Now, where there's probably some gray area is the psychoactive hemp and THCA. I know that there is a supposed federal conflict in language with the intention and the actuality of those laws, but I believe the state of Nevada actually does define within Department of Agriculture what is considered marijuana versus hemp. And I would say that we would have to look towards those regulations and make sure somebody is operating compliantly. I don't think that the intention of this board or any licensing application in the future would be to greenlight any business that is not operating compliantly and giving them a pathway into the legal market from a state of an illicit product or something that it's just not legal within their business licensing structure.
Okay. So as long as it's within a structure that is legal. So let's say they're making infused cookies, but they're infused with CBD. They're infused with hemp, CBD, that's all in compliance, not Delta 8. And they wanted to transition into cannabis. Then that would be something that they would be allowed to participate into this program.
Maybe to address more of the extreme of that, if somebody is making hot dogs or tacos and they have a food vendor license to do that, then yes, they could get into this industry.
Okay, got it.
So
I know a young lady that has an infused honey line and she infuses it with CBD, with hemp, with CBD.
I think it would all fall back
And
to,
she has all the licensing she needs.
I would say, keep in mind, we're not defining the application.
Okay.
We're defining what would be an emerging small business. So
Right. And
it's probably outside of our scope, but eventually I would imagine that somebody is going to say, in order to qualify, here's your application. They'll look at your business history, your personal background. There will probably be some sort of investigative review, I would assume, any privilege license.
Yeah.
And that's where it would become problematic. For anybody that's listening that is looking at this program or looking to get into the legal cannabis licensed market, I would say you probably don't want to do anything to taint your resume or your business background or anything like that. You probably want to be as clean as possible before applying. So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, so I think what we actually have to vote on here.
Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of background work that I did to look at this. So first off, emerging small cannabis business, that's something that we need to define. Again, I think what we're actually going to try and vote on here today is what would satisfy the requirements, as in the number of employees and the annual gross revenue. So this is not cannabis specific, and I apologize, I didn't make copies of this, but this is on the GOED page, so the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And I'm not saying that this is what we need to adopt, but I was looking, the first place I went to was, does the Nevada Secretary of State, Business and Industry, or Economic Development departments, do they define small businesses or anything like that? I think I did look at, let's see, on a more of a federal level, like the SBA, for example, I believe it's less than 500 employees, which if you apply that to our cannabis industry, there's probably not too many companies that employ over 500 people. So I don't think that one is on the high side, or I think that one is on the high side. So what I found on the GoEd website was they basically qualified businesses into tier 1 or tier 2. And it's not an emerging cannabis business, but the actual terminology is a emerging small business. So tier 1 is that it doesn't employ more than 20 full-time or full-time equivalents, and it doesn't exceed 1.7 million for 3 years prior to the date of the application. And the annual gross receipts, let me step back. If providing construction services, the average annual gross receipts do not exceed 1.7 million. If involved in the sale of goods or services, the average annual gross receipts don't exceed 700,000.
Okay,
So
I'm sorry, really quick. Could you go back to tier 1? What is the number of people?
20
No more than, at least 20.
must not employ more than 20.
No,
So
more than
yeah,
20. Got
20
it.
or
Okay.
below.
Okay, got it.
And then it further defines tier 2 being 30,
Okay.
3.5 million if you're a construction business, and 1.3 million if you're goods and services.
Okay.
Let's see here, I think, yep, got that. So those are just 2 benchmarks as far as what we'd be looking at. And I would say that looking at the purpose or the purpose and scope of this, just because we define an emerging small cannabis business doesn't mean that there will not be the availability or ability for companies that would exceed these revenue numbers to come into the market at a later date. They just would not fall under our category that we are focused on. So I think the challenge or task that we have as it pertains to this one is, where do we want to set the number of employees and where do we want to set our revenue standards? And I don't necessarily, when we say construction, we might not think of those being cannabis adjacent, but I think it is applicable because I would look at construction being potential contractors, lighting companies, HVAC companies, people that are very familiar with the cannabis industry and have operated in it. So I do like the way that they differentiate between construction and goods and sales of goods and services. And then I guess what does this get you as far as outside the cannabis industry and within the GoEd requirements? It qualifies you for certain state programs, organizations, potential credit advisory, some potential grants, loans, things like that. So it opens the door to small business development. There's one other thing that I think is important that we would want to adopt in ours. And this says, what is prohibited is that it cannot be a subsidiary or parent company belonging to a group of firms that are owned or controlled by the same persons if, in aggregate, the group of firms does not qualify pursuant to program requirements. So I think that's important for us because, even to use your example as far as smoke shops, well, if there's a chain of 50 smoke shops and individually they all are below the thresholds, but collectively they're obviously one large company, I don't think that meets the intent of what we're trying to do. So I would propose, at a minimum, we add that same language to ours.
Agreed.
But I'm going to open it up to, again, this is one example, open up to the members on where you feel that.
I think one thing that we have to consider, cannabis is considerably smaller when it comes to employees and operations, and different licensees have different amount of employees. I was looking at this number, the 729 active licenses in Nevada. And we are looking at 15,000 employees. It's the 15,435 as the number keeps coming up as the number of employees. And so I think that we have to consider what our smaller operators would be. And I don't know numbers like that, because I'm not in operations, to say what a small business would qualify for in the state of Nevada as far as revenue, I don't want to exclude those businesses that maybe based on numbers that they would be disqualified if they're trying to become an established brand here and just haven't had the resources to do so. I don't know. So numbers is not my thing to look at or understand quite, because like I said, I'm not in operations. But I think that the number of employees, I look at some of these small operations that might have 3 to 5 employees.
Mhm.
And so as long as we keep it at a number that says, 10 or below or 20 or below, no more than 10 or no more than 20. Take it a tier down from this number that represents smaller businesses that I think would have more numbers, because in our space, if you are a big operator or you're an MSO, then you wouldn't be able to qualify for this type of opportunity.
Correct.
So yeah,
I think one more
my 2 cents.
influencing factor, and I can only speak to what I've seen in applications previously, is in all of our previous applications, any applicant had to put up $250,000 in cash in a bank account, or accessible funds, maybe not technically cash. But that's something to take into consideration as well, is like there is a pretty heavy lift based on previous applications, not saying that that's something that we have to have here that would qualify somebody. So I think if we set the limit too small, it would be very difficult for somebody to be in a position to meet the application requirements, but still fall as a small business per our program. And I think we want to make sure that, again, not saying that that is going to be a requirement to the application moving forward. I don't think that's within our scope, but just something to consider, as there's already a financial threshold that needs to be crossed even to get into the industry.
And obviously, for the first time in Nevada state statute, we had social equity that was mentioned in 2021, that was the first time applicants didn't have to have the upfront capital. But 2 years later, we see that those applicants are struggling to be able to meet the requirements to be open, to get to the next steps of them being able to be operational because of the lack of capital and having to raise those funds. And so I agree. But I also understand that if we're going to give some of these smaller operators an opportunity, the resources that they're missing would be a part of this pilot program as well. And so I think we have to take that into consideration, whether this pilot program says maybe we have the different tiers and then we have a social equity tier. Maybe that's how we kind of create this. But also those social equity applicants will need capital. And I know that there's been different conversations about what we do with tax revenue that comes from the cannabis industry and how that can be distributed to help some of our social equity applicants, maybe a fund that it goes into. And the pilot programming that I'm imagining is going to have the resources, so equipment and a facility and those things that would be provided to these applicants that would eliminate some of that upfront cost that they would have to, put together in order to be operational.
Yep.
I'm thinking micro license is the pilot program that I was imagining that would work, that I've seen work in other states, and we just adopt it to what would work in Nevada. But I feel like that ideally, if we are going to introduce this pilot program, it would be for our lower tier people that we want to bring in, that qualify, of course, based on an application process that we put together. But I just think that there's a bracket, a group that we don't want to miss out on providing an opportunity for them to come into this marketplace.
Yep. And so I would say to that note, the higher the number of employees and the higher revenue is going to be more inclusive.
Right.
So, and
exactly.
And again, it's I think there's a lot of what the license structure looks like, what those application requirements look like, are outside the scope of what we're giving inputs on, but all valid conversations for down the road. Member Joy, I'm curious if you have any inputs from an operator level as well.
Not specifically to this right now. You know, what you guys are talking about is it's going to be tricky. You can have some operators running a certain business with very few employees doing a great job and bringing in a lot of top line revenue. And then you can have some operators running with a lot of employees and not bringing in much top line revenue. So basing this off the size of the company, as far as number of employees would probably be the best way to go.
Well, I think per the regulation, I believe we do need to define both of them. Just, I'm reading in between the lines of number of employees and annual gross revenue versus a or statement. So I think I've seen some other programs in similar states that have talk about 50 employees. I think the gross revenue for us is probably the more critical one that we wouldn't want to go too low.
Okay.
No.
Do we have to have an income, like a revenue number attached to it?
We do.
Okay.
I'm unless you would advise otherwise, I'm going to say per the regulation, it does say number of employees and annual gross revenue.
Oh, it does. Okay, got it. And so we can't go against that. Got it. Okay. No.
I could interject. Keep in mind that this is already like an operational business. I think you're thinking of people that want to come in, so.
Well, no, I'm thinking about operational businesses that just don't have those high number of revenue numbers is what I'm thinking of.
There's a cap, so.
It's under the,
Oh,
not,
okay.
yeah. Under,
okay.
yeah.
Okay,
That's
got
what
it. I
that's what
did
I'm saying.
not
If we set it too low, we will exclude some people.
understood.
If the
We set it
more
too- okay.
flexibility is that,
Got it.
that's
So I
why-
meant a minimum or a
Right.
maximum of that number.
A max.
The max.
Okay, got it.
so my concern going back to even the license applications is I would normally, if all else being equal, probably lean towards aligning closer to what GoEd has already established. But also being a small business owner, having been in the cannabis industry for 10 years or so, I think that the strength of the businesses that come in here, there is going to be, I'll just cut to it. I think 700,000 is probably too low for some of those businesses. I think probably 1.3 is even on the low side for some of those businesses in annual revenue. And to be more inclusive, I would be willing to propose 30 employees for the cap and probably somewhere around, call it 2.5 million, 2 million.
Okay. You know better than I do with the numbers, so.
That's your top, correct, Shane?
Right, yeah, that's the top.
Correct. Anybody, meaning anybody below that would qualify as an emerging small cannabis business. Now, doesn't mean that there aren't that a company that could be, do 10 million a year and have 150 employees wouldn't be able to apply. It just wouldn't fall under this specific market participation program. Yeah, to be honest, before I found the GoEd requirements, I think in my mind, I was hovering somewhere around 50, maybe like 50 and 2.5, 3 million. And I noticed that this one was a little bit more restrictive, but I think we're probably somewhere in the ballpark between there. If we wanted to lean to something more inclusive versus less inclusive, then that would push us probably to the 50 employees and call it 3 million number, which is more than twice on the revenue side of what the tier 2 is defined by GoEd.
I like your suggestion. And then the tier 1 would be the same as well, is what you're saying?
I'm not sure if we necessarily need to define 2 tiers for it.
Okay,
I think
just 1 tier.
because from reading this program, there were some certain qualifications based on which tier. And I think for the purposes of ours, and to keep it simple, we could probably call it like the equivalent of tier 2, the highest side. And then down the road, if that needs to be further restricted based on certain qualifications for programs, it can implement it at that time.
Okay.
So if I'm hearing you right, Member Joy, what do you think of 50 employees and 3 million?
Yeah, I don't have any issues with any of that. It's a big company. It's a lot of
I feel like it
employees.
is too. I'm thinking about my small businesses here. Let's not say, those are their in operation. Cultivation probably has about 25 people, 25, 30 people, I would say, employed. But I don't know what the numbers are on the revenue side. But I doubt it's more than 3 million.
Okay, and I'm open to lowering it. I would say we're probably somewhere between 30 to 50
Right.
if we're gonna go off this, and 1.3 to 3 million. So I'm open for proposals if,
I think,
split the difference in 40 and,
yeah, I think 40 and I say 2. I say 2 million.
Member Joy?
I mean,
Yeah,
again.
we're just pulling numbers out right now, so yeah.
Yeah, I think
that
so.
sounds fine.
Okay, let's see here. I would lean towards not being too restrictive, so about 2.5 and 40.
Sure.
All right, so what we will be voting on would be in order to qualify for an emerging small cannabis business, it must not employ more than 40 full-time or full-time equivalent employees, and annual gross receipts must not exceed 2.5 million for the 3 years preceding the date of the application.
Hey, guys, sorry, I know I'm jumping in kind of late, but
Nope.
you're talking about a company that's got 40 people employed and doing about 200,000 a month in top line gross revenue. Those numbers just don't match up with each other, if you know what I mean. I know for Sealing, if you got a company that's got 40 to 50 employees, they most likely are doing quite a bit more than 200,000 a month in rev.
I would agree with that.
If they're making any money anyway. So I think we've got to scale that a little bit better to make a little more sense.
And does that reflect what is happening in the industry right now? Just the state of the industry in Nevada right now, those numbers, Raleigh?
I believe so. I don't know any operational companies that could support 40 employees in cannabis.
Right,
Current
in current
licensees
cannabis, right,
that could
yeah.
support 40 employees on 2.5 million. I think that's a good point.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
I mean, Shane, just think of your staff and your monthly rev. I'm doing the same thing here with my operation and then some of the other operations that we work with. You know, they're top line rev. If 40 is the number for employees, I think you got to look at the top line rev and double that at least.
Okay. Would you have any issues matching the same exact criteria that GoEd uses at 30 and construction services being 3.5 and sale of goods and services at 1.3?
No, I'm trying to get my head around how construction services would really wrap into this.
That was one that I was thinking could be an electrical contractor, HVAC, lighting potentially.
But we're already using all of those companies. I mean, I've got electricians in my building right now and HVAC
Right.
guys.
I think the idea is for if those companies wanted a pathway to get into the licensed cannabis space or into the industry.
Right.
And I don't think what we've defined here is like, and probably outside the scope of today is like, what are the benefits of qualifying as an emerging small business or small
Yeah.
cannabis business?
So an HVAC company that wants to start selling weed?
Sure, that's
Right?
what they want to do.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I just
Again,
wanted to clarify
I
that.
think for us, it's defining the criteria, and then at a later stage is going to be how it actually gets applied.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Brawley on this. So let me just kind of wrap my head around what we're talking about here. So if we're talking about a micro license, that was my thought pattern for a pilot program. Whether we're creating new licenses like a transportation or delivery license, or I wouldn't say consumption because we're still trying to figure that out. But if, let's say it's a new license that we introduce to the market, or are we saying we're going to allow people to open up a mini retail store? Or are we, like, the pilot program is just going to be for vendors that want to get on shelves? I think that if we're thinking about how we're going to introduce these small businesses into the market, like Brawley said, you already have these specific contractors you've been working with for years, you have established relationships with. Are you going to then introduce a small vendor to come in and do part of your lighting now and take some business away from the bigger company that's doing the lighting? Or are we just talking about one specific lane for them to get into this space and focus just on that?
I don't think it's that defined. I mean, again, going back to the regulation, it's to participate in the cannabis industry.
Participate.
So
That's
participate
broad.
does not mean
Yeah.
owning a license. It does not mean providing services. Like, to Brawley's point, nothing stops a company now, but to make it easier for a small business, here would be one thing that I would think of. Agent cards might be prohibitive for smaller businesses to even start providing consulting services or contracting services, anything that would trip the requirement for their people to have an agent card. So if they were to qualify under the emerging small cannabis business criteria, then potentially there's a fee reduction for those people to get their agent cards and make it easier for them to come into the industry. So again, it could be a pathway to a license that's not defined now. It could be lowering the barriers of entry to get people to work with us. And it's not just owning a license and operations that can be prohibitive. There's other things, again, like agent card fees, license application fees. In local jurisdictions, you have cannabis support business fees, which can be prohibitive to a lot of companies. So I think all we're doing is trying to identify if there is a small business that is motivated to participate. I think the intention of this regulation is we're trying to break down some cost barriers for them to be able to get in. If they're a large company and they have the resources to pay those fees to get in, it's probably a moot point.
Right. Okay. Okay. Okay.
All right, where does that leave us? Circling back on, we can either go with the GOED 30, 3.5, 1.3.
Yeah, but to Brawley's point, I don't know if we need to define a construction business and just have a number versus a construction vendor versus somebody else. Right?
Sure. I think the idea is construction-related services typically,
Make
even on a
more,
small,
yeah.
to take on larger projects.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that they are overall more profitable than a service business.
Just
that has
expensive
higher
to do
margins.
their service. To do what they.
So, and then
Okay.
the challenge of creating, and this is what I do like how GoEd broke it up, because the reason they separated it there, I think they're really trying to look overall as like, can we match the health of the company? Versus if we were to take one number and say this 3.5, it probably disadvantages construction businesses a little bit and makes it easier for services businesses to qualify. Nothing says we have to split it that way, but I like the approach, and that seemed to make sense to me.
Okay.
Would you have any issues just adopting the same tier 2 as GoEd did?
I wouldn't, but again, I'm not a numbers person. So it's the revenue part that I'm not an expertise on, to understand what that revenue number should, but it sounds like they've already thought about it. So I'm not opposed.
Member Joy, would you have any pushback or want to adopt that? I'll tell you my position. I'm either in line with GoEd Tier 2 or slightly higher.
I'm in line with, yeah, I would match your opinion there, Terry.
Okay. In that case, it's, I'll take a vote for 30 employees, 3.5 mil on the construction side, and we'll bump the goods and services, just call it 1.5.
And so are we supposed to define what the construction is versus goods and services? No?
I'm going to say no to that
Okay,
one.
all right, okay.
Okay. In that case, so the requirement for the number of employees and annual gross revenue would be satisfied by a company that does not employ more than 30 full-time or full-time equivalent employees. If they are providing construction services, average annual gross receipts must not exceed 3.5 million for 3 years preceding date of application. Or if they're involved in sales of goods and services, average annual gross receipts must not exceed 1.5 million for the 3 years preceding date of application. Do I have a motion to approve?
Yeah, I approve this motion.
So you'll need to move to
I move to,
define,
okay, I move to define, the number of employees at 30
Mhm.
and annual gross revenue at 3.5, for construction and 1.3,
1.5.
1.5 for, goods and services
And do we have,
established by the Board of Regulation.
and do we have a second?
So 30 employees and 1.5 million annually.
3.30 employees, 3.5 if it's construction, 1.5 if it's goods and services.
Okay, I would think that number would need to be a little bit higher, but I will
On the
second.
goods and services,
Yeah,
2.
at least. I'm thinking more 2.5.
I'm comfortable with 2.5. Member Buffon?
I'm comfortable with
Okay.
2.5.
So I'm gonna read this in again. So
Okay.
you have a motion to approve that the requirement for number of employees and annual gross revenue would be satisfied if a company does not employ more than 30 full-time or full-time equivalent employees. If they are providing construction services, average annual gross receipts must not exceed 3.5 million for 3 years preceding date of application. Or if involved in sale of goods, services, average annual gross receipts must not exceed 2.5 million for the 3 years preceding date of application. Do I have a motion to approve?
I approve the motion to satisfy the requirements for the number of employees to 30, no more than 30. And the annual gross revenue for construction vendors at 3.5 million and for goods and services vendors at 2.5 million.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Oof.
Okay.
Good job, you guys.
Let's see here. Moving on to item number 4. This is for discussion only. Won't get too bogged down in this, but you all have a copy of the demographic study of 2024. And I think really the purpose of including this on the agenda was I wanted us to have a little bit of a barometer as far as I know there was a lot of effort on the CCB side to collect the data from the operators to compile this. And it was more so if anybody did not know that this report was out there, I wanted it to be mentioned in this meeting that you can download it from the CCB's website. again, I don't necessarily think that we need to read through and assess this. It was mainly for discussion. But I will at least say the key takeaways, which is basically the summary. So there was 15,435 registered agent card holders. 748 identify as executives, owner, officers, or board members. Out of those, 60% identified as male, 39% identified as female, 52% identified as white, 19% identified as Hispanic, 19% identified as Black, and then a total of 26% identified as being either Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. And then 46% of all agent cards were in the 25 to 34-year-old age group. So interesting report, and open it up for comments from any of the other members.
I mean, I think we were aware of these numbers. I appreciate the study. And I, like Abby, I'd like to see this every year, both of the studies, but I appreciate, the information. It's helpful to know the marketplace.
Definitely.
Sure.
And certainly applicable to us as we're looking at
Absolutely.
minority groups and diversified groups as well.
That's right. It does not, though, age, race does not identify LGBTQ in this report. Yeah.
It does not.
Yeah.
And
Or veterans.
it does not.
Right.
And I think as it pertains to some of the other things that we're discussing here, I think maybe that's a recommendation that maybe we'll make to the CCB moving forward, is that they do include those statistics. So thank you for that. Member Joy, any comments on that note?
No comments.
All right. We will move on to item number 5 for possible action, and it is propose and define qualifying criteria of women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, and LGBTQ-owned businesses as applicable to NRS 678A.310. And I'll read that regulation. And as it applies to, let's see here, 310, it says NRS 678A.310, item 2 Delta D, a subcommittee on market participation to review and make recommendations on matters relating to the participation of women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, LGBTQ-owned businesses, and local agriculture in the cannabis industry in the state. So I will, a little bit of homework that I did prior to this one. Let's see here. I think they're in chapter 75A of the NRS. It talks about a qualification threshold of 51% or more. So I think that is what will be my suggestion, that we stick to and don't deviate from. There is also in NRS 231A.155. I won't read the whole thing, but it talks about qualifications for an impact for qualified demographical groups. So that also reflects the 51% number. And I would also like to highlight that it's when you go on your Secretary of State for your business license, if any companies that will go and register, you have the option of self-selecting as, I believe it on that one, it's women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, or LGBTQ. No mention of agricultural business, but that is also data that the Secretary of State should be able to refine and quantify if somebody is an agricultural business or not. Now, how do we, one of the challenges that we are going to have is, how do we qualify those businesses? Is it self-selection or self-identification, or is there some sort of criteria that goes through? I think that, again, circling back to the good work that GoEd has done ahead of us, and this might be on the Secretary of State page as well, but also other departments at the state level have done a really decent job at They do, with the exception of agriculture, which I'm going to, again, assume that Secretary of State can identify. All those other groups list a variety of certification programs. Some of them are government certifications, such as, for example, if the SBA can certify veteran-owned businesses, whether you're disabled or not. There are other organizations on the state and local level, some private, some public, that also will certify whether it is women-owned, minority-owned, or LGBTQ-owned. And you can apply for those certifications from a list of the organizations that are listed on the state website. And if you get that qualification, they'll guide you through the process, and they'll do the verification that you're 51% or above, or whatever their specific criteria is. And then you will get that official designation that you can then use moving forward.
And I think that makes perfect sense. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think that if you qualify with the state program for those categories, then you will qualify for our program.
Okay. And let's see here. So our task would be to propose and define the qualifying criteria. So what I'll word this into an actual motion in a second, but I think the first step, there's basically two parts for this. The first, I guess 3, 51% of the ownership or higher is the threshold for those qualifications. And they would also need to be qualified or certified under the state provided services that are out there. Now I said there's 3 parts. That third part is because those programs don't necessarily address agriculture. And that's part of what we need to bring in as well, I believe, at least the local agriculture, and you'll be able to get that from the Secretary of State page.
But I also think if you're local agriculture, you still go through the same process of qualifying for minority, women, LGBTQ owned based on the qualification, whatever the certification process is, even if it's an agriculture business, because these other businesses that we're talking about are providing other goods and services. They might not be in agriculture, but if you're in agriculture and you qualify, then you would go through the same process as you would with any other business license.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, or maybe ask, or maybe the question that comes out of that is, are we looking at multiple different categories, agriculture being one of them, or are we saying that agriculture, in order to qualify, has to include 51% of one of those? The way
that it's read is not like that, though.
Correct.
Right.
The way if I'm looking straight at the regulation, relating to the participation of 1, women-owned businesses, 2, minority-owned businesses, 3, veteran-owned, 4, LGBTQ-owned, and local agriculture being the 5th.
5th, yeah. Okay. Okay, so we are voting on that agreed that in order to be qualified for this pilot program, you would have to have 51% or higher ownership of one of these categories. You have to prove that an executive has 51 or ownership, just an employee has an ownership of 51% or higher, correct? And then they qualify under the state regulations as a minority, woman-owned, veteran-owned, LGBTQ-owned, or local agriculture business.
Yes, the agriculture one definitely throws a bit of a curveball in there, because if you're a agriculture business, probably 100% of the business is going more or less. I guess maybe not necessarily. I have multiple things in your business, but the programs that I found that are on the Secretary of State website, or it might not be on that. In fact, I don't think it is. I think it's on the GoEd or Business and Industry. If you get that certification, they will ensure that the companies are 51% or more. So it doesn't hurt for us to say 51%, although it is most likely redundant.
Okay, I understand that.
Member Joy, do you have any inputs towards this one?
Yeah. As far as the 51% goes, it's not specific to a single individual, correct? We gotta
Correct.
clarify that. It's 51% of, it could be 3 women that own this at 33 1/3% across the board.
Or it could be 51 women and 49 men, and it would qualify.
Correct. Okay,
Yes, it's the total ownership.
got it.
Oh, okay, right. So is at minimum, 51% has to be owned by a woman. And so if you got 3 women that own the business, then that qualifies.
That is
obviously.
correct.
Right, okay, got it.
Correct.
And this is I have gone through, from the veteran and the minority side, have gone through some of these programs before, and they are pretty rigorous, and some of them will take a long time, and they'll look into everything and make you prove certain things to get there. So
We don't want to have to reinvent their wheel. They've
I-
already created it,
I would agree with that.
run with it.
I think in my opinion, it's pretty straightforward that we'll adopt the qualifying criteria that already exists. What I don't think is defined is the local agriculture. And if we want to expand that same 51%, I think this is a very rare case, but a company that might have multiple different functions and 51% of it is agriculture, I would say would qualify for this program.
Okay,
Or that's-
we're saying
would you-
51% of its revenue?
Yeah,
qualifies for
exactly. It would have to
for
be
the-
derived from agriculture.
Okay, yeah,
I don't.
not 51% of the owner is a farmer.
The owners are, exactly, the owners are gonna have to,
Figure that out. Okay, so we're saying, so just on the agriculture, local agriculture, that 51% of their revenue.
just maybe so it also says in this state, so 51% of a company's revenue to qualify for this would have to come from agriculture within the state of
Local
Nevada.
agriculture. Mhm.
I'm trying to think as I say that, if that creates any unintended loopholes of my business did $10 in revenue and 6 of it was from local agriculture, so therefore I qualify.
Yeah, it would.
It would.
What, real quick, what, does anybody have an example of what local ag that we would be considering for this program that would participate in the cannabis industry?
Potentially, agriculture, non-cannabis agriculture that is providing goods and services to farmers markets. I mean, it could be hemp as well. From what I know of, there's a lot of small business around Nevada that just focus on local agriculture, and I think we're trying to be inclusive of some of those.
Well, I think about GLP, Organic Produce Farm, that would be considered a local agriculture business that, you know, is already in the cannabis space. But they also are growing organic produce. And so, but there's others that I know are not in the cannabis space that are growing local organic produce that would want to come into this space.
To do what exactly?
To grow cannabis.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Let's just get it out there on the table.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
they would want to be a part of the cultivation process. They're doing vertical growing of produce.
I think also this, circling back to what we touched on before, this doesn't always necessarily mean licensed operations. It could be a nutrient supplier and taking down some of the
Sure.
barriers to entry.
Sure.
I'm curious, Sarah, do you have any inputs on the local agriculture piece of this?
We don't know much about it. So
Okay.
I really
No problem.
can't say.
Well, then I think it would be, if we want to make this inclusive, where local agriculture would still have to meet those demographic minimums as the other ones.
Makes codes for business have to be registered both federally and through the state through the Department of Taxation. So you can actually break it down. So a NAICS code is broke down for the whole of what that business does. So they're already registered through the taxation and through their federal tax returns as a business. So if you look at that, that would already determine whether it's an agricultural
I think the challenge with using NAICS codes though is you self-select them and you can have multiple for the same business.
True.
So,
That would, I guess we're trying to determine what would qualify as local ag. And only local.
yep. Let's see here. I'm gonna break this up into
Two
two.
parts.
Table that.
Yeah, I'm gonna table the agriculture one and I'm gonna break this up into, well, let's see here. I guess we can't really vote on it and leave part of it off for later. Okay,
You can break it up.
okay, let's do that. Let's break it up and at least we'll circle back on that one, do a little bit more homework. But what I would like to propose a motion on is, let's see here. I would like to make a motion to define the qualifying criteria of women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned and LGBTQ-owned businesses as 51% of the ownership structure qualifies or identifies as one of those groups, and they are independently certified from any state-approved agency.
Okay. I second the motion.
I think we'll need a,
You'll have to move.
Oh.
So I move to.
Oh, okay. So I move to.
Before you do that, Nicole,
Okay.
sorry.
No, you're fine, please.
I'm just looking at this. Shane, do you think 51%? I'm just thinking in my head of a lot of these companies that have, someone that falls in that criteria of women-owned, minority-owned. Are we that concerned after we've already established the company size up there of 30 employees? That it be 51%?
I would say 51% is what is commonly used across any of the state NRS to define the group. So I think we're keeping consistent with that. I believe that would also be the qualifying criteria that the independent agencies do. And I think we're addressing two separate issues. They might be used in combination, but for the purposes of our group, I believe we'll be keeping these separate.
Yeah, okay. I'm just thinking on the 51%, that's a pretty, the aggregate majority there could be pretty hard to reach for some companies that do meet a lot of these qualifications and maybe aren't at 51, but are at 40 or somewhere else. You're saying there's already a standard set?
There is, and having taken some of these criteria in applications for cannabis licenses outside of Nevada, I've always seen the 51% threshold in at least all the applications that I participated in.
Right. Okay. That means if you got a company with two people and one of them's a Caucasian like myself, and then 49% of it is owned by a minority or woman, they're not going to qualify.
Under this criteria and this provision, that would be correct. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be able to apply. They just would not be able to select or identify as one of those groups, which again, I do feel or do know is consistent throughout the state of Nevada.
Okay. I'm sure it's that way for a reason, because there's ways to game it too, obviously.
Right, of course.
Okay.
All right, so do we have a motion to approve?
Okay, motion to approve.
Yeah, you can just
I
say
am,
like, I'm moved to.
okay,
I move to define the qualifying criteria of women.
okay. I move to define the qualifying criteria of women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, and LGBTQ-owned businesses as 51% or higher in one of those of ownership of one of those categories and independent certified under the state regulations for one
Under
of those.
state-approved
businesses.
agency.
Yes, state-approved agency.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. That motion is approved. Okay, moving on to item number 6, discussion of the CCB's 2024 cannabis market study. Again, this is for discussion only, so I asked ChatGPT to give me a little bit of an overview of this very thorough report. So
Yes, great.
here are a couple things that I just wanted to address. And again, this report also is probably the most comprehensive report that I've seen come out of our industry in 10 years. So kudos to the staff that put together the time to finally release this. And again, I hope to see more of this. But I would say, and this will kind of go into the next item agenda that I wanted to bring up. So some highlights. I believe this is from 2022. The industry generated 862 million in adult use sales, with the medical market accounting for only 1.6 million. So no big surprise as we move to adult use. There's been a significant sales decline since the pandemic peak. The illicit market in Nevada is estimated to be 242 million to 370 million annually. So to put that in perspective, almost half the market size of our legal market is a potential illicit market, which is, as an operator and having
Scary
some of
time.
these roundtable discussions through some state regulators and other stakeholders, is probably one of the biggest problems that I think we face as an operator in our local market. Key challenges: there's been declining medical cannabis numbers. There's been a reduction in the active cannabis licenses, especially in cultivation and production. And consumers still rely heavily on the illicit market for reasons like price, perceived quality, and convenience. Some recommendations from the report were to identify underserved areas for potential licensing opportunities, which in some aspects of what we're discussing today. Collaborate with local universities on research initiatives. So there's been a lot of movement on that in the last couple of years. Launch public awareness campaigns, emphasize the benefits of regulated cannabis. And I think that falls with like a broader harm reduction and the risks of taking any untested illicit substance. And then consider the tax impacts on consumer behavior to reduce the incentive to buy from the illicit market. So basically, if we are overregulated and overtaxed, and therefore our product ends up on the shelves at a significantly higher price, that price delta, if that's too extreme, it's going to have a hard time enticing people to buy from the legal market versus the illicit market. And that's really and this here, it also talks about some regulatory and economic insights. Federal legalization could lead to significant changes, including a national marketplace and state-to-state distribution. National competition could decrease market prices, which would affect all the markets with just access to product. And by all the markets, I mean both the legal and illicit ones. And then federal oversight may add regulatory burdens, but could also standardize product safety and testing, which I think is much needed as well. And then there was a social justice implication. It said potential benefits from federal legalization include expunging records of individuals with cannabis-related convictions and positively impacting affected communities. So again, I'll open it up if you have any comments on it, but otherwise the full report's available on the CCB website. It's worth a read.
It definitely was. I appreciate, thank you for sending this over. Like I said, I hadn't gotten the physical paper yet to look at it. I've only looked at it on a screen. So this was great. You know, I noticed that one of the things I wanted to talk about was the illicit market numbers, that the projected numbers of like where they see sales going for the illicit market. Obviously, there's a chart here, one of the charts here that have it listed all the way to 2030 of what the illicit market will be doing. And it's interesting to see the numbers go down in revenue. Not so much for California, though, projected, but it's still going in the right direction, downward trend. And it's just interesting to think about what kind of world we'll be living in if federal legalization happens before that, and how that will affect our industry locally, regionally, and what it will mean for operators. What it's going to mean for operators if, you know, it doesn't get legalized and it just gets descheduled or rescheduled, I'm sorry. What that's going to look like and how it's going to change the landscape of the operating industry. So I found it interesting, and I appreciate that they did this market research, and I feel like we should have one annually for sure, just to reflect what's happening.
Agreed. And I will add too, what's to me as an operator scary about the possibility of 370 million in illicit opportunities or illicit market participation is that does not include psychoactive hemp, which in the last year has arguably been as impactful to our business and taking revenue away from the legal market. And for anybody that hasn't heard the term psychoactive hemp, not to get into chemistry 101 or agriculture 101, but psychoactive hemp and the marijuana, the cannabis that we're selling in the dispensaries is essentially the same thing. It will be by definition psychoactive, competes. The difference is the fact that this can be delivered overnight to your door, and anybody, regardless of age, can buy it online and sign for these products. You never really know where it's coming from. It doesn't meet the same testing standards. It's not regulated.
Scary.
There's a lot of issues that can come out of that. That I think we're seeing.
Yeah.
Member Joy, do you have any comments or inputs on this topic?
As far as the intoxicating hemp, no. I did see some encouraging stuff at the last roundtable we had on Friday with CCB and several other government Nevada state agencies that they are looking at it and making attempts, but still got a long way to go to clean that up. And yeah, as far as the illicit market's concerned, I just don't. I'd have to dive in deeper and see the source data, how they're coming up with the illicit market decreasing. And I think if the only way it's decreasing is because all those sales are just becoming legalized through the Farm Bill loophole.
Yep, agreed.
That's the only way I could see that stuff decreasing, because the number of smoke shops in Nevada has increased exponentially in the last 3 years. And we know why. They're not selling more vape than they were in 2020.
Yep. Try taking a trip to Texas. That's what they have there. But, okay, I think we'll, so there's no action required for that one. Moving on to one of our last items, which I think we kind of touched on, and really what I wanted to put this one on the agenda is discussion, the assessment of the current industry threats and challenges for small cannabis businesses. Again, this isn't anything that we need to vote on, but it's more of a temperature check to see, when we're talking about what does a small business in cannabis look like and what some of those threats are. I think there's no doubt what affects everybody of all sizes is the illicit and psychoactive hemp markets. What you will typically find in any smaller business is there's more of an impact on a smaller business than the ability of a more elastic, larger business to absorb some of those changes. So smaller businesses typically with the same margin percentage of a profit, because they're doing less revenue, therefore make less money. So it's a lot of the cost of running a small business is on a percentage basis, your overhead is a lot higher as a percentage of your revenue as a larger cannabis company would. So I think those are some of the challenges that we need to look at for small businesses. It's the smaller guys that I've been seeing going out of business here and turning in their cultivation licenses, their production licenses. I think we've successfully moved beyond the days where there was a very active threat of a $250,000 or $500,000 fine getting issued, which could be absolutely devastating and for a small business and unrecoverable. Certainly not saying that those fines couldn't be handed out now, but I think that we've grown in our assessment from a regulatory perspective on, what is the right way to punish and enforce regulatory violations. And we've seen the effects that those have had on some businesses in the past. So I think we made some really positive steps as operators, industry, working with the regulators to move through that. But I think there is a very real threat leading into federal legalization of consolidation between larger businesses and what will happen to that mom and pop operator that doesn't have the access to capital, doesn't have the same resources, doesn't have a multi-state presence where some of these relationships are built at some of the top tiers. So those are all the things that smaller businesses might have to contend with. And I think one of the things that excited me about being a part of this subcommittee was, can we make some recommendations to the board in the future that maybe give the small businesses a fighting chance? The ones that are more affected by and impacted by the cost of compliance, the cost of overhead, the tax impacts. I think one thing that is always painful for me is, I know this is all revenue based, but the amount of money I send to the city of North Las Vegas for a business licensing fee is exponentially higher than what I have available to pay my team. And I think those are some of the things that when we get taxed at multiple different levels, that has a compounding effect, especially on a small business. And this all feeds back into, in order to make that same contribution margin, that profit, and cover your overhead to survive, you need to price it higher, which doesn't solve the illicit market issue. So I think that's certainly some challenges that we need to look at as far as the taxation. I don't think from my takeaways that most people have the appetite to say we're going to focus efforts and spend government dollars on trying to push out the illicit market. I think there's some challenges with enforcement for sure. I think probably the more of an ROI from our business is how can we expand the legal market? And you do that by making it more accessible. I think that comes from a pricing structure. And it also, when we have the ability to open up through delivery or accessing the strip corridor, which is basically a green light for any illicit market or illicit dealer to sell to a gaming establishment on the strip. But I mean, I don't know any licensed operator that's going to take that risk and start delivering to the strip or it's well outside of our regulations. So there's a huge untapped market potential there when we're talking about the gaming corridor. And then there's the pricing side. So I think we need to be a little bit more liberal with our delivery regulations, which also allows us to be more accessible to people that want to purchase from the legal market, maybe not in a dispensary, but through a delivery model. Those are the things that I think our industry collectively needs to address in the next year pretty quickly if we want to see some turnaround to this market.
Agreed. Thank you for that insight.
Of course.
As well as just, there's other places we can, try to reduce costs for some of our operators. We've talked about exit bags and those kind of things that keep adding up. And I think there's also some other things that we can look at there to help with operational costs for our operators. And also thinking about our environmental impact that the industry has. And so I think there's a couple of things we can do there as well.
Agreed. Member Joy is another operator. Any insights or opinion? And it sounded like you made the last roundtable as well. So if you have any lessons learned or takeaways from that.
No, not anything more than I've already shared.
Okay. All right. Well, again, that was for discussion only. So I think that pretty much wraps up everything that we had to vote on, minus the public comments. So just a little reminder, we'll start here first. And Amber, if there's anybody that has any comments that wants to dial in, do you mind repeating the instructions on that again, please?
Sure. If you wish to
Okay.
provide public comment, click the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen if joining by Zoom. If joining by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand.
Thank you very much. And we will start here locally.
All right. Hi, Abby Kaufman again, for the record. Okay, so I was on the report. Thank you for a great conversation today. In terms of the other recommendation, I'll kind of skip over the partner with local universities. I see the value, but unlike all of the other recommendations in the report, there really was no like supporting evidence, or like I couldn't find where else except for where it says this is a suggestion supporting that. So I just thought that was a little odd. And then for the public awareness campaign, if you look into that one, the main reason is based on input from 166 survey respondents, and the report explicitly states that it's like should be taken like because of that, that it's not 100%. And the report also estimates, just for context, that there's there's 500,000 cannabis consumers that consume cannabis each month in Nevada that are Nevada residents. So that's 166 survey participants that are saying that quality is that was the top factor for buying from a dealer. But it doesn't show of those participants how many of them regularly purchase from a dealer. And New Frontier Data, who is the source of most of the figures related to the unlicensed market and those projections, they actually did a custom analysis for the Chamber of Cannabis in 2023 that I'd be happy to share with anybody. You can email me, it's abby@cfclv.org. But their data, it says that when comparing Nevada consumers to others who live in adult use markets, they actually see a higher level of regulated market adoption in Nevada. That said, and I was the product owner of Equio, which is the platform that the unlicensed markets are coming from. So I'm curious if the third party, the agency that did the study, like if they reached out to New Frontier Data to get their latest. I'm just not sure when the last data update was for that. So then I know that I'm running low on time, but one thing that's come up a lot is about, when it comes to increasing participation for minority-owned businesses and emerging small businesses, I really feel like creating a social equity fund and allocating money from the enforcement of unlicensed activities to emerging small cannabis businesses, or particularly the social equity licenses. And that's the conditionally approved licenses is what I was getting at with my last comment. But if the CCB does have the authority to enforce it with SB 328 and the modification of 678A.440, then that is a new source of revenue coming into the state budget. So it's not taking anything away. So if and when they do start collecting fees and penalties from the unlicensed operations, it'd be nice to earmark that. And currently, the language does not explicitly state that it has to go to the general fund. It was implicit, and that came up at the the May CCB workshop. But I think that would be a good way to start creating funds, because that's going to be the biggest problem with the licensed businesses. So I think I had more to say, but I wanted to make sure to hit on a little bit of everything. So thank you for the great discussion.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I feel like I wouldn't be properly giving my public safety announcement if I didn't touch on, I've heard this argument that the quality on the illicit market is higher than in the legal market, but I would also consider a lot of that comes from, they also can use Eagle 20 and other harmful substances that we are specifically prohibited from using for a very good reason. So whatever growth hormones and plant hormones and other chemicals that are injected into some of those products to get certain effects doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe for consumption. So.
We know that. But also to her comment about the public education, and you mentioned that as well, is needed. And I've mentioned this before in a CCB meeting. The issue is, who does the burden lie on? Is it the producer and manufacturer and the grower and the cultivator? Does the cost of educating the consumer lie on them, or does it lie on the CCB? And I think that that's where the holdup was, like, who's gonna pay for this educational, PR, so.
All right, anybody left locally? Amber, is there anybody online?
There is. Will the person with phone number ending in 2119 dial *6 to unmute? Please state your name before providing your comment, and as a reminder, keep your comments to 3 minutes and you'll receive a 30-second warning.
I can't tell if anybody is on mute, but maybe check your microphone if you're trying to talk. Last call, Amber, I'm not sure if you're able to see anything that we're not able to see here on Zoom.
They're there.
Well, we'll give it another 15 seconds or so. Okay, with that, then we're going to close public comment, and I think that wraps up. I appreciate everybody's inputs, and think for getting through some of the action items, made some good progress today. And just as a follow-on, we still, for the next one, let's do a little bit of homework on the local agriculture. We'll have to address that. And then, yeah, that's really the stats that we'll have to still tie up for the next one. So thank you all. I appreciate it. And we'll call it meeting adjourned.